House Judiciary will now come to order. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Barthel.
Here.
Oldham. Present. Fox.
Here.
Dietrich.
Here.
Hammond.
Here.
Lateral.
Present.
Ishki.
Here.
Poirier. Excused. Rasmussen.
Here.
Reimer.
Here.
St. John.
Here.
Johns.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We have quorum. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our last House Judiciary Committee meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Representative Dietrich, seconded by Representative Lateral. All those in favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Minutes are so approved. Welcome everybody to the House Judiciary Committee this morning. We're grateful that you are all here with us. A couple of things just to note before we begin. Number one, if you have any handouts for the committee, you're welcome to have them distributed, but please do distribute them through our pages. One of them is right over here. The other one just ran out, so we'll introduce them in a little bit. Please remember that if you have any questions or comments, please direct those through the chair, which will be me for half the meeting, and my co-chair will be running the meeting for the rest of the meeting. Representative Clancy. Please also remember to silence your electronic devices, and if you wish to testify, you're more than welcome to do so, but please do sign in at that podium in the back. There is one bill that's being distributed to the committee members right now. It's draft 522, and it's an act to codify legislation enacted in 2019. This is an annual bill that's passed every year. And our Code Commission has asked that this bill be submitted through our Judiciary Committee. So I'll get a moment. Looks like everybody's got it through that. This is just like the Chief Justice bill. It's not final action on the bill. This is just to have it introduced, and we'll likely see it back here once it's assigned back up to House Judiciary Committee. So the chair would entertain a motion to introduce and act to codify legislation enacted in 2019 through the Committee on Judiciary at the request of the Code Commission.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Representative Lateral, seconded by Representative Pischke. All those in favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. So it is so introduced. The first bill on our agenda today is House Bill 1096. That's my bill. I'm the prime sponsor on that bill, so I'll be passing the gavel to our very capable chair, Representative Johns. And we are going to set time parameters on this bill. And so we'll have 35 minutes of proponent testimony and 35 minutes of opponent testimony. So please do try to keep your comments concise. Try not to duplicate testimony. We do want to hear what you have to say, but unfortunately, because we're a 37-day legislature this year, we just had no choice but to sometimes keep these into some time constraints. So with that, I will pass the gavel to Representative John.
Thank you. The first matter then to be heard is House Bill 1096, which is an act to prohibit commercial surrogacy contracts and provide for a penalty facilitating a commercial surrogacy. We will hear testimony from the proponents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, representatives, members of the House Judiciary Committee. My name is John Hanson. I'm a representative from Del Rapids, South Dakota. I do have just a couple of things to hand out. If a page could assist me with that, I would be grateful. This and this too. I offer the committee today House Bill 1096. It's an act to prohibit commercial surrogacy. Before I start talking about what the bill does, I want to briefly say what the bill does not do. This bill does not prevent or criminalize altruistic surrogacy. That is, those surrogacies where individuals volunteer and do not profit from the creation of a human person. It does not prohibit reimbursement of medical expenses in those situations. This bill does not criminalize mothers, it does not criminalize intended parents, it does not criminalize healthcare providers. So here's what the bill does. This bill, House Bill 1096, bans commercial businesses who profit off of the buying and selling of children. This bill prohibits for-profit commercial surrogacy brokerages from making a commodity out of mothers and children, and bans the enforcement of the contracts which do just that. The bill itself is pretty simple. There's 3 sections. Section 1 sets forth some definitions. Section 2 provides the penalty for surrogacy brokers, and Section 3 makes commercial surrogacy contracts void and unenforceable. There will be 2 amendments. They are on your LRC website. That's 1096B and C. B just provides for some grandfather clause language, and C just brings about some clarity, and we can, in just one little section of the bill, we can discuss that later when appropriate. Commercial surrogacy makes a commodity out of mothers and children. Anytime someone can go to a for-profit business and say, I want to buy a child, and then they can order the child based on certain factors: race, health, mental capacity, physical fitness, sex. And then a little over 9 months later, a baby will have been produced to order and delivered to them. That's the buying and selling of children. And it's wrong. What's more, when you make a commodity out of human life is treated as mere property that can be easily discarded. Here's a passage from a recent law review article in the Hastings Law Journal, and it's entitled Contracts for Children. This is the quote: "Selective reduction clauses contribute to the debate over whether surrogacy contracts contradict public policy. Many gestational surrogacy contracts contain a selective reduction clause, which gives the intended parents the right to choose to terminate one or more of the fetuses in the event of multiple pregnancy or fetal abnormality. These contracts call for abortions within the language of the contract." And sure enough, I think I've got this website pulled up. This is from Dakota Surrogacy. This is a surrogacy brokerage in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I've got this highlighted. You can see this is under estimated expenses, fetal reduction, $750. This brokerage will pay a mother $750 for what they call a fetal reduction, which is an abortion. Surrogacy also leads to coercion and exploitation of women. Jennifer Law from the Center of Bioethics and Culture is here. She's an expert in this area, and she'll be up here to testify momentarily. But for now, I want to call your attention to the letter that's been distributed to you from Freedom's Journey out of Rapid City. It's been passed out, and I just want to read a portion of that letter. Quote: "Freedom's Journey is an organization dedicated to assisting human trafficking survivors and combating human trafficking of all forms. I write this letter in support of House Bill 1096. We have great compassion for those who desire to become parents. Yet fulfilling this desire must not become a commercial endeavor. Commercial surrogacy at its fundamental level renders the surrogate mother a vessel for the benefit of others and the baby as a commodity. This opens the door to the exploitation of vulnerable women of childbearing age, often poor women, and creates an unequal relationship between the surrogate mother and the purchasing parties. These relationships lend themselves to coercion and significant health risks for the surrogate mother." What's more, the commercial surrogacy industry in South Dakota today is totally unregulated. There are no specific laws in the topic that provide any protection to mothers or children. But compare that to our time-tested adoption statutes, which protect South Dakota children by ensuring healthy adoptions and protect mothers from coercion and fraud. You've got before you a printout of just the sections, the code sections of 25-6. That's our adoption section. Now, there's another section of the law that deals with termination of parental rights. We're not even looking at that area. We're just looking at the adoption section here. Surrogacy contracts, unlike what you have in front of you, evade, among other, the following requirements that would otherwise be required under adoption. It's a felony to offer, give, or receive any money or other consideration or thing of value in connection with placing a child for adoption. Consent of a spouse is required in adoption. It's a felony to compel, coerce, or force adoption. In adoption, a child must live in the home for 6 months before the adoption is finalized. A home study is required before an adoption. There must be a court hearing granting an adoption. The person adopting shall agree that the child adopted shall be treated in all respects as his or her own. The court must examine parents to determine if they are financially able and morally fit to have the care and training of the child, and that the best interest of the child will be promoted by the adoption. Sometimes the Department of Social Services is required to provide notice and make a recommendation as to the desirability of the adoption, and there's more. You've got those sections in front of you. We, as the people of the state of South Dakota, have put those laws into place because we recognize the need to protect mothers and children in vulnerable situations. Those sorts of protections, specifically with regard to commercial surrogacy, do not exist. Commercial surrogacy, instead, subjects custody of children to the whims of contract law. In the adoption context, like you just heard, and in every other area of the law that deals with questions regarding the custody of children, South Dakota has long held one basic prudent consideration. One question: what is in the best interest of the child? But instead of using the best interest of the child standard, commercial surrogacy contracts subject the custody of children to the whims of contract law. That disturbs me. And I think it might disturb you too. Commercial surrogacy makes a commodity out of mothers and kids. It leads to human beings being treated as property that can be easily discarded. It leads to coercion and trafficking of women. It's totally unregulated, and it subjects children to the whims of contract law. There are some things that money cannot buy. Now, I don't question for 1 second the genuine motives of mothers and intended parents. My heart goes out to anybody struggling with infertility. I don't have the answers for everyone. I pray that adoption might be the answer for some. But I do know that making for-profit businesses and commodities out of mothers and children is wrong. That's why I would ask for your support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hanson. Do we have any further proponent testimony?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the House Judiciary Committee. My name is Jennifer Wall, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak with you all today on House Bill 1096. Every 14 minutes in the United States, someone is added to the kidney transplant list. 13 Americans die every day while waiting for a life-saving kidney transplant. And that's just kidneys, not even taking into account heart, liver, lungs, other organs that are transplanted. For many years, I worked as a pediatric critical care nurse and cared for babies and children who were recipients of organ transplant. A common slogan in organ donation is giving the gift of life, because the donor is truly saving a life. U.S. policy, though, on organ donation is firmly and rightly set within the parameters of a true donation, where the donor isn't paid for their organs or their services, but their medical care is covered. And even though the waiting list in America has over 100,000 people on it today, waiting for that gift of life, we reject efforts to change policy to a payment structure. In America, we are committed to the ethical allocation of precious life-saving resources on a needs-based waiting list. Whenever a story breaks of a powerful or wealthy person who receives an organ donation, the public gets nervous, wondering if the haves have jumped the line while the have-nots keep waiting. Think of Mickey Mantle and Steve Jobs, both who received liver transplants. It's important to ensure the public's trust that scarce organs are allocated fairly to those most in need. If U.S. policy changed turning organs into commodities to be bought and sold, we know organs would be sold by the poor and the most economically vulnerable who are in need of money, and conversely that those, the rich and wealthy, would be first in line and able to buy. Medical students are taught that in medical ethical decision-making and informed consent, money can play a powerfully coercive role in the person's decision. It is the case that the more financial need a person has, the more they are likely willing to take risk. They'll roll the dice. So in the spirit of justice and equality with allocation of organs, our good policy in America has allowed transplantation medicine to operate with a large sense of trust from the American people. This is a context for my remarks that bring me here today to talk about surrogacy and commercial surrogacy. House Bill 1096 is a welcome step toward protecting women, almost always young mothers, and the children they carry as surrogate mothers. What are some of the ways that women and children will be protected by this bill? First, similar to the concerns of organ donation remaining truly an altruistic gift, we see in states like my state, California, where I live, where commercial surrogacy is illegal, we have had several cases of exploitation of low-income women. Women like Melissa Cook, Brittany Rose Torres, Jessica Allen, to name just a few. Melissa was a single mom who entered into a commercial surrogacy contract in order to raise money to fight a custody battle for her children with her ex-husband. She found herself pregnant with triplets for a man in Atlanta, Georgia, and when she was asked to reduce and or terminate the pregnancy, she refused. In her mind, the pregnancy was uncomplicated, the babies were growing, she felt there was no reason to terminate the pregnancy or reduce the number of babies just because the intended father didn't want triplets. Upon her refusal, she was threatened with a lawsuit for breach of her contract. She was thankfully able to secure a pro bono attorney since she had no money to hire an attorney, and her attorney took her case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, challenging the constitutionality of commercial surrogacy contracts. Melissa still to this day has never once seen the triplets and has no way of knowing how they are doing. Brittany Rose Torres, another low-income mother in Southern California with a small child, saw an ad on Facebook to become a commercial surrogate. She thought this was a great way to make some much-needed money for her family, and she entered into a contract with a couple she'd never even met. She too found herself pregnant with triplets and being threatened with breach of contract when she was asked and refused to reduce the pregnancy down to twins. Her commercial surrogacy contract even had end-of-life decision-making language in it where she waived those rights to the intended parents. So if during her pregnancy she required life support, the intended parents would make the decision if and when to terminate her life. She delivered the triplets but had all kinds of pregnancy health-related complications and still struggles postpartum after the birth of the children. Jessica Allen was a very high-profile case in California. Her husband saw an ad for commercial surrogacy, and they decided that this extra income would be welcomed. She wanted to quit her job as a caregiver and stay home with their small children and maybe even buy a house. Jessica was hired by a couple in China, where all surrogacy is illegal. The Chinese come to America to hire surrogates with the added bonus that the babies are now U.S. citizens. The clinic transferred one embryo into Jessica, but on ultrasound they discovered she was pregnant with twins. She was told the embryo had split, creating twins naturally. At the time of birth, as is common, the babies were whisked away and Jessica never even got a glimpse of them. What was discovered weeks after giving birth, she was had a rare occurrence called superfetation. So she had actually given birth to the Chinese couple's baby and her own biological child. Superfetation is when a woman gets pregnant and a few days later she actually gets pregnant a second time. It often goes unnoticed and they just think that a woman had twins. The only reason that this was discovered is Jessica's Caucasian, her husband is black, and she gave birth to a Chinese couple's baby. And at birth, they noticed that one baby appeared Chinese and one baby appeared to be mixed race. DNA testing confirmed this. It took Jessica 2 months to get custody of her child, a year to have his Chinese name removed from the birth certificate. The Chinese couple demanded part of the money back because they paid for 2 babies but only got 1. And the surrogacy agency demanded money from Jessica because they took care of her baby for 2 months before returning her baby back to her. Her case is an active lawsuit in California right now. The common thread of these stories is these women saw an ad offering them money to get the gift of life. They were all in need of money and thought this was the solution to their financial problems. There was no gift in the sense of the organ donor. There was, however, a commercial contract directing everything about the surrogate's mother's life with penalties and threats if she doesn't comply. Let me now finally turn to the health risks to surrogate mothers. Most people are unaware that a surrogate pregnancy, even a surrogate carrying 1 baby, is a higher risk pregnancy than a natural pregnancy. High-risk pregnancies, of course, put the mother and the babies at risk. Dr. Anthony Deal, an OB/GYN doctor in Rapid City, who is also Kelly Martinez's physician, you'll hear from Kelly next, talks about in my documentary film that features Kelly, the conflicts of interest a physician has when taking care of a surrogate mother and being paid by another couple who intend to raise a child. When Kelly was very sick and the intended parents were making demands, Dr. Deal said, "Who has the ultimate say? You really straddle the line and you don't know. There were all sorts of times I didn't know who I was supposed to listen to, and something always comes up and you don't know who to go with." Surrogacy is a growing phenomenon that we're just now getting important data in the medical literature. Studies show that women pregnant with donor eggs, the very definition of a gestational surrogate, have a 3-fold risk of developing hypertension, preeclampsia, maternal gestational diabetes, placenta previa. You will hear from Kelly and her serious complications, but let me tell you about Gail Robinson, a surrogate. She describes her preeclampsia like this: "I gained 20 pounds in 1 week. I woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see the numbers on my phone to call. I started screaming for help. The people downstairs called the ambulance. When they got there, I was conscious. I asked for oxygen. I don't remember anything else. I lost consciousness and I woke up the next evening. I had to have an emergency cesarean. 3 doctors were in the ER. They came to see me later. One said I was minutes from death. The other said I was in a coma having seizures, and one said I was the worst case that they'd ever seen." Britt Brown, a mother of 3 and a 3-time commercial surrogate, died in Boise, Idaho in October 2015. The twins she was caring for a couple in Spain, where all surrogacy is illegal, died too. Crystal Willett, a mother of 2 from Southern California, died in February of 2017 of complications of her surrogate pregnancy. Another surrogate in her surrogacy group told me, "The hospital discharged her too soon. I believe she died at home and the cause of death was eventually found to be a blood clot." Michelle Reeves, a wife and mother of 2 from San Diego, died 2 weeks today. This was her second surrogate pregnancy for the same intended parents. While the baby she was carrying survived, Michelle died in the ICU right after giving birth of an amniotic embolism. Sadly, these are not the only stories I could tell you. House Bill 1096 doesn't prohibit altruistic surrogacy in South Dakota. It only prohibits women being paid like organ donors. The U.S. has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the developed world, having doubled from 1991 to 2014. And we are the only developed country who has a maternal mortality rate that is rising. Knowing the high risk of pregnancies to women and even higher risk to surrogate pregnancies, why would we not want to pass legislation that will help reduce this mortality rate? Thank you. And with the chairman's permission, may I stay seated next to Kelly while she testifies?
You may. We'll take the testimony of the next proponent now.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Martinez, and I'm a mother. I have 3 children at home, and I am also the mother to 5 babies that I've had through 3 surrogacies. I gave birth to twins for a couple from France, a single birth to a couple in the U.S. My last surrogacy was another set of twins for a couple in Spain. I was a commercial gestational surrogate each time, and my decision to be a surrogate has changed me forever, and not for the better. I no longer support commercial surrogacy, and this is why. I used to be a very proud, independent, and open-minded woman. I was proud because I had been through so much, like losing my parents and my brother to suicide. And yet, I still had a purpose. I was driven, and being pregnant fulfilled my need to be independent and relied upon by others. I loved being pregnant, knowing that the life inside me depended on me 24/7. After my brother committed suicide, and I was living in rural Iowa at the time, I saw an ad for surrogacy. I remembered writing a paper in high school on surrogacy, and at that time I debated it. But after having 2 of my own children and seeing people struggling with infertility, I thought I could help these couples. I called the agency and spoke with a wonderful woman there and completed their application to become a surrogate. The agency called me and said that they had matched me with a couple in Paris who longed for a child and were having difficulty finding someone to help them. I felt bad for them, and I agreed to be their surrogate. The agency sent me a video to watch on the joys of surrogacy. I was told that I could claim the money I was going to be paid on my taxes or not. I was told my maternity clothes allowance could be spent on anything I wanted, and I was also told that my name would not go on the birth certificate for the children. My husband and I went to Oregon and met the couple in person. They were very sweet. We got along great. My husband and I were also under the impression that they were married, and that is how it was possible for them to use surrogacy. 2 embryos were transferred, and I became pregnant with the twins on the very first try. Closer to my delivery date, the agency called to tell me that immediately after birth of the twins, I would have to go to Des Moines, Iowa to get the birth certificates. That was not discussed. This trip was difficult for me to make as I delivered one twin vaginally and the other by C-section and was still recovering, but I did what the agency asked. I then received another call from them saying I would now need to go to Chicago because something unexpected had happened and the couple wouldn't be able to leave the U.S. without the passports for the babies. I was fighting infection post-delivery, but my husband and I loaded up our car with our 2 small children and made the trip to Chicago. When we got to Chicago, the couple met us at Denny's to tell us that surrogacy is illegal in Paris, and that the following morning I would go to the French consulate. They told me that one of them was going to lie about our relationship and that the babies were a result of an affair. I tried to call my attorney, but it was 9 p.m. and I couldn't reach them or the agency. I went to the French consulate the next day and everything was spoken in French. I don't speak French or understand it. I was asked to sign a 7-page document and I had no idea what it said. No one translated anything for me and I was scared to death and shaking as I held the baby. I was terrified. I signed the papers and left. Once I was back home in Iowa, I terminated my parental rights immediately. I was seeing a counselor in Iowa to help me deal with things, and after seeing the counselor for a while, my counselor suggested I meet with another couple she was counseling who was struggling with infertility. I was sympathetic, and money was still very tight for us as a family, and I thought this could help us. I agreed to help them. Very soon after I gave birth to a little girl for them, they divorced, in a very messy divorce. Time went on and our family continued to grow as we had our own 3rd child, and finances were still an issue. We had just moved back to South Dakota, and with pregnancies being relatively easy for me, up to this point, I decided to do a final surrogacy for a couple in Spain. At that time, I did not know surrogacy was illegal in Spain. Things were going very well with the couple until they found out that we were having 2 boys. They had paid the fertility clinic extra money to put in a girl and a boy embryo. So they found out it was 2 boys, things changed, and they became very angry. This pregnancy was very difficult as I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. At 30 weeks, my doctor in Rapid City admitted me to the hospital due to dangerously high blood pressure and borderline stroke. After a few days in the hospital, my doctor said we needed to do an emergency C-section or I might have a stroke and die. The boys were delivered 10 weeks premature. The Spanish couple came to the hospital and the first thing they wanted to know is if it was still 2 boys. They had hoped that all the ultrasounds were somehow wrong and that it was really the boy and girl that they paid for. After the twins were taken back to Spain, I then found out they did not pay my medical bills. I had debt collectors coming after me for $8,000 in medical bills, and the agency told me there was nothing they could do. The agency said they represented both of us, but they were not responsible. I then reached out to Jennifer Law, who is here with me today, for help. Now I am a broken woman who has been used, lied to, and exploited. I very much regret my decision to serve as a commercial surrogate. I thought by me being a surrogate, I can continue what I love, being pregnant, helping others, and making money. If it sounds too good to be true, it most likely is. I have now had my eyes opened to the fact that this is really about the money, not what is best for the children. I've been exploited and lied to and have had so much suffering and heartache. I'm speaking up today so that I might save others from the disappointments and hurts that I have had, to let you know that there is no protection for commercial surrogates against exploitation and vulnerability. My life and my family will never be the same. If I could take back my journeys, I would, because it has changed me for the worse. The agencies never cared about me. I didn't extend my family as I was hoping. I feel used and tossed to the side, and my heart is forever broken, my family forever changed. The first couple reached out to me a few years back saying I needed to do an adoption proceeding with them now to remove my name from the pair's birth certificates. The little girl I gave birth to now is torn between two people, not in a loving home. No one knows how the second twins in Spain are doing, or if the parents accepted them for being two boys rather than a boy and a girl, or even if they have them. I think about them daily, and I wish I could tell them how sorry I am for bringing them into this whole situation. I don't know if they ever will know about me, and I just pray they are loved and accepted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Do we have any further proponent testimony?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Dale Barcher, registered lobbyist for South Dakota Right to Life. We do rise in support of HB1096, and I'll be brief. We represent one of the parties impacted by HB1096, and this would be our babies. While commercial surrogacy harms women in a variety of ways, from inflicting trauma, as you just heard, to health risk, South Dakota Right to Life is also concerned about one specific harm to children: abortion. Commercial surrogacy contracts may well lead to abortion. You will find on this industry's websites, as Representative Hansen has pointed out, and in their contracts to birth mothers, verbiage detailing that the prospective parents may well be charged for fetal reductions. It's simply a nice way of saying abortion. Commercial surrogacy treats children as products which can be designed, purchased, and they are disposable. The birth mother is used to produce a child in order to fulfill the dictates of a contract which can compel the mother to abort a child, a baby, that is deemed undesirable. Representatives of the commercial industry, surrogacy industry has gone too far by trying to compel women to abort healthy babies solely for financial benefit. I understand that the issue of surrogacy can be confusing for pro-lifers. After all, we love babies, and so any practice that produces babies must be good, right? But once we filter our opinions through the lens of children's rights, the pro-life response to commercial surrogacy is crystal clear. This must be stopped. And this is why South Dakota Right to Life respectfully asks for your support of HB 1096. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Any further testimony?
Mr. Chairman, proponents of these 30 minutes.
Please keep that in mind.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Debbie Keys. I'm representing Family Heritage Alliance Action. There's a handout coming around to you today, two-sided. One side will show you the 26 countries that have already banned commercial surrogacy. And you've heard a lot of reasons of why that might happen. By the colored circles, that shows you, the United States deals with these issues one state at a time. And so you can see that South Dakota is one of 21 states who have not dealt with this issue yet. There are no protections in our state for mothers and babies from the surrogacy industry. If you flip the page over, you've got a summary of what Representative Hansen has already talked to you about, the difference between adoption and commercial surrogacy. And I think I would just like to highlight that with an adoption, the best interest of the child is always kept in mind. A judge determines what the best interest of the child is. With a surrogacy, a commercial surrogacy, anyone with enough money can enter into the contract. And like Representative Hansen said, the best interest of this child isn't considered, it's under contract law. So we would ask you to help stop commercial surrogacy in South Dakota and support Senate Bill 1096. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one very short further.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Chris Phillips. I'm the director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, which represents the Catholic bishops of South Dakota. Proudly stand in support of House Bill 1096, which House Bill 1096 is going to ensure that Jennifer Law never receives a call for help from another South Dakota woman. That's what it does. There are in a civilized society some things that money just shouldn't be able to buy. That's why we cannot buy or sell a human organ, as has been mentioned, kidneys, livers, etc. That's why in South Dakota it is a Class 6 felony to offer financial consideration in exchange for a child under our adoption provisions. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is the eugenic tendencies that may occur. So for example, a quick internet search reveals websites like Donor and Concierge or other websites like it where you can buy human eggs. Quote, your ideal egg may be a blonde egg donor, may be a beautiful egg donor, maybe even be an athletic egg donor, is what one advertisement says. So you can design a baby with just the right characteristics, which is the definition of eugenics. As has been mentioned, loss of human life. And I think it is important for the Catholic Conference to be on the record acknowledging that there are many people who deeply long for the gift of a child. And these are good people. This desire is beautiful, but commercial surrogacy is not the answer. It's a practice that denigrates women. It denigrates the dignity of pregnancy and the dignity of children. Thank you for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. We'll now hear testimony in opposition to this bill, 1096. Do we have anyone hearing that wishes to give testimony in opposition? Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Good morning, Chair and House Judiciary Committee. My name is Naomi Ludeman-Smith, and I am a lobbyist for LEAD, Leaders Empowered and Determined. We are lead advocates for women, children, and families in South Dakota, and I am here to urge you to vote no. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. I am here to urge you to vote no on HB 1096. LEAD asserts that this bill is anti-family. Instead of a sweeping criminalization of commercial surrogacy, might we spend our efforts and time on proposing regulation similar to adoption to avoid such stories as we've heard this morning, so that families can have the joy and protected contractual process of families through surrogacy. This bill keeps couples who struggle with infertility from being able to complete their families. Surrogacy allows for couples to have a child that is biologically theirs. It allows a woman who is able to carry a child with the ability to give the gift of life to a family who desperately desires a family. Surrogacy is an incredible gift. It can also be incredibly taxing to the woman carrying the child and to her family, as we've heard. The contracts that this bill would outlaw allows for legal reimbursement for all the factors involved with caring and giving to a child. Many women would not be able to give this gift to other families without the reimbursement and proper regulations. But with this bill, it would be a sweeping criminalization rather than efforts to find regulations to allow families to have children. Thank you for your serious consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Do we have any further opponents? We have a number of people on the telephone who want to give testimony. Are there any other persons present at this time, however, in the room that wish to give testimony in opposition? If not, we'll proceed to the telephone.
House Judiciary Committee, prepared to give testimony on 36. Okay, I'll put you on the line, and then wait for the chair to ask for your testimony.
I believe the first person is Ella Day, Sioux Falls. Did we lose her?
Sounds like it.
You know where the private lobby's at? If you go like back into the corner, there's a little office over there. This is the leader's office. And Trudy will probably be in there. Can you grab a bottle of water out of there? Need it? Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Let me try.
We'll get there yet.
I'm gonna put you on, and I'll do it right this time.
Hello? Is someone on the
Hi.
line?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, who is this, please? State your name.
This is Ella Diane.
All right, Ms. Dave, please give your testimony.
First, I'd like to thank the committee for letting me speak on this issue. I will be speaking against HB 1096 for myself and other surrogates. Like I said, my name is Ella. I'm an ER nurse in Sioux Falls, and I'm also a 3-time surrogate. There are many misconceptions about surrogacy, mainly about surrogate compensation and the agencies themselves. I'm hoping to clear up some miscommunications with what I have to say today. If you bear with me, I'm far from a public speaker. First, I'd like to say who or what did commercial surrogacy harm? Usually, a bill is proposed to make something better after harm or negligence has been committed. So I was just wondering why we are choosing to punish a very specific area of fertility that usually has positive outcomes. Little miracles just come out of surrogacy agencies. Second, if passing this bill to dismantle surrogate agencies, would it not be correct in saying, why not dismantle adoption agencies as well? Both agencies screen intended parents and screen mothers. Why is one different from the other? And lastly, I'd like everyone to think, do they know anyone who has struggled to start a family? If your answer is no, please listen to my justification why this bill is only going to harm the resources the people of South Dakota have. A couple that will remain unnamed has started the long, painful, and sometimes heartbreaking journey that is infertility. The struggle has taken over 10 years.
It first started when they realized after 2 years of trying that they could not conceive and had to consult with a fertility doctor. At this time, the couple is put through a multitude of tests to see where their infertility lies. Next, the woman will start on hormones. These medications are very invasive, very painful, and expensive. Sometimes, just adjusting these hormones, the woman will conceive. Sometimes, they will end in miscarriage after miscarriage. Now that woman has to be put through more hormone adjustments and try IVF. She tries transfer after transfer to conceive. Some of the embryos never take. Some of the embryos take for a few weeks, hear a heartbeat on one ultrasound, but the next week the heartbeat is gone. After 3 years of this, the couple, especially the woman, must come to terms with the reality that she will not be able to carry her own child. Everyone tells the couple they must adopt. They do the research, find that sometimes adoption agencies can charge just as much as a surrogate agency, and they will never know if the mother might back out to keep their own child. After long consideration, they go forward with the dream of having their own child. Now this couple must gain the courage not only to tell others of their struggle, but to ask a close friend or family if they would be willing to carry for them. The couple explains to the family and friends the grueling process of IVF and the hormones' effect on the body, with the idea of getting close to 40 to 60 injections per embryo transfer. Most of their family and friends say sorry, but they have to decline. But by slim chance, this couple did find one altruistic cousin who is willing not only to go through the medication, but also risk her life to give this gift to this couple. The couple and the cousin go to the fertility doctor to get medically cleared. Unfortunately, the couple's cousin is disqualified. She has preeclampsia with her prior pregnancy, which medically disqualifies her from being a candidate. Things such as gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, even just having a tilted uterus can get a woman disqualified from being a medically cleared surrogate. Now, with this law in effect, how does this family find a surrogate? The one family member they had not only is just not medically cleared, I've personally seen people so desperate to find a surrogate, they have gone to Craigslist to find it due to lack of resources. I want everyone to ask themselves, is this a position you'd want your sister, your daughter, or your granddaughter to find themselves at? If she were to post on Craigslist out of desperation, it would in turn be put in jail according to the law that is presented in HB1096, and say that she doesn't get caught this time. Now she has a surrogate, but she doesn't know this person at all. Would you trust a person found on Craigslist to carry your grandchild? This embryo is legally the couple's genetic child, going into the womb of a stranger that has no prior medical check or criminal screening. As a couple that has already been through so much heartbreak, this bill is going to add the pitfalls of finding their own surrogate and trying to figure out the legalities of surrogacy. Agencies protect couples and surrogates alike. Agencies are usually ran by prior surrogates, who usually have seen what the pitfalls and legalities can lead to. They know when they're just resourceful when it comes to South Dakota laws for the specific area of fertility. We shouldn't damn the agencies, we should support them, because they really are the experts in this area. They do all the medical, psychological, and financial screening to approve surrogates. Now, the same couple, once they have already gone through the battle that is infertility, can go to the agency, look through pre-approved surrogate profiles in order to find a match that best suits them. They can go into this knowing that in the end, they're going to have a miracle at the end. They're going to have a healthy child that is their own, without the worry of screening, lawyers, escrows, and hospital arrangements. That is where agencies excel. That is why I feel this bill will take away local resources from South Dakota families. As for the compensation part, many people say surrogates sell babies. This is human trafficking. I've heard all of it. But I will say that the compensation that the surrogate mother receives is in no way, shape, or form for the baby. Can you put a price on a child? No. The compensation the surrogate receives is for the burden and the suffering they bear being pregnant, the hours of puking from morning sickness, calling into work from painful contractions, and just taking the risk of bringing the child into the world. I work in the medical community, and I will tell you that having a child is not an easy process. Women suffer greatly from being pregnant. Women lose organs. Women die every day trying to bring life into this world. And no one would ask a complete stranger to take these risks for free. The first journey I had as a surrogate, I was a single mom trying to go back to school and get my nursing degree. I would not be where I am today without the help of my surrogate journey and the agency that supported me during that time. I'm willing to answer any questions about the surrogacy process, and I thank the committee for giving me time to speak today.
Since we have a number of other people that wish to call in, we're limited on time, I'm going to ask any members of the committee at this time whether you have any questions of Ms. Day. Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Day.
Thank you.
We have Emily Galen, Dakota Surrogacy, that wishes to give testimony. We'll call her next.
Hi, I'm calling from the House Judiciary Committee for House Bill 1096. So if you'd like to provide your testimony to the committee, I can push you on speaker.
Hello, is this Ms. Galen? Hello? Do we have Ms. Emily Galen on the line?
Yes, this is Emily Galing.
All right, Ms. Galen, you go ahead, please give your testimony, identify yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Emily Galing, and I'm one of the co-founders of Dakota Surrogacy. Please excuse my appearing by phone. I had planned to be there in person, but I couldn't attend because I've been ill. This morning, as I was listening to the babbling of my 2.5-year-old beautiful daughter, it struck me, as it often does, how wonderful it is to be her mother, how much I love her, from her wild curly hair to her dimples to her 10 perfect toes. But what if I never got the opportunity to be a mother? Imagine you and your spouse are hoping to start a family. You both have so much excitement at the prospect of a child you could love and raise together. There is nothing you wanted more. Now what if, month after month, you keep getting sad news? After a year, you begin tests with your doctor. Then you try different injections, maybe in vitro, but you are disappointed over and over. One couple I know went through 10 years of this. Next, hopeful, you contact an adoption agency. You spend thousands of dollars to apply and get a home study so you are ready, but you are not picked. Finally, you were picked, but the birth mother changed her mind and decided to keep the baby. Devastated, you talk to your doctor about gestational surrogacy. You talk to a family and friends in hopes that one would do that for you, but none are willing and able to make such a commitment. For this couple, surrogacy is the last option, and I've been blessed to see people become parents this way. According to the CDC, about 6% of married women aged 15 to 44 years in the United States are infertile. Also, about 12% of women aged 15 to 44 years in the United States have difficulty getting pregnant. For women, there are two types of infertility: inability to carry a fetus to term and inability to produce a viable egg. For some who are unable to carry a fetus to term, surrogacy becomes the only option to become a parent. I am an attorney who practices in the field of surrogacy. I've built this practice over 10 years. Recently, I co-founded Dakota Surrogacy. At Dakota Surrogacy, we match parents to pre-screened surrogates. We run background checks on our surrogate candidates, and they speak to a psychologist to confirm that they are ready and able to become a surrogate. We look at a lot of factors, such as whether she has finished having her own children and what her motivation is. We also make sure she has had at least one successful pregnancy and understands what it means to go through the emotional process of pregnancy, labor, and delivery. It is also important that the gestational carrier has stable financial situation. We would never want a situation in which a carrier feels she has to do something she wouldn't otherwise do. We don't want there to be an unequal balance of power between the parents and the surrogate. Both the parents and the surrogate have their own attorney to advocate for them. The parents are also screened. We run background checks. We interview the parents. We make sure that the baby will be raised in a loving home. The parents go speak with a psychologist as well to ensure that surrogacy is something that they can and should do. The agency ensures the pregnancy expenses are covered by insurance, not an uncomplicated issue. The agency coordinates travel if needed. An escrow account is set up so that financial obligations will be met, including any uncovered medical bills, which protects the gestational surrogate. Dakota Surrogacy is a member of the Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy, a nonprofit organization founded by a group of egg donation and surrogacy agencies whose purpose is to define and promote ethical behavior by all parties involved in third-party reproduction. I am a fellow of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproductive Technology Attorneys. As such, I have pledged and I follow the Academy Code of Ethics. We also work with clinics who follow guidelines put out by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. We are in favor of regulation that would protect all parties involved. Previously, the South Dakota Bar's Family Law section put a great deal of work into reviewing the law on surrogacy and came out with proposed legislation. I would ask that the committee allows the Bar time to come out with its position on this subject. I understand you've heard a story of a gestational carrier who had a difficult time. However, it emphasizes that regulation would help protect the gestational carrier, and it also helps protect the parent. I have personally been involved in well over 100 surrogacy journeys, and I have not seen a gestational carrier have this issue. Of course, there is a risk that people take advantage of other people in every situation, and that is why we are vigilant to adhere to all of the guidelines and best practices. Perhaps we don't appreciate in our country enough that every pregnancy carries risk, but being careful and protective of the guidelines and best practices helps to prevent and diffuse situations. Compensation is for pain and suffering of pregnancy. This is not comparable to selling a person. It is providing an opportunity for people to have a child. I'm personally pro-life. These are embryos, which are, by definition, potential life. An embryo itself is not going to become life if it's not given the opportunity. This is the way that it can actually become life. In fact, the last chance for a child to result in a lot of instances. A couple going through infertility will create these embryos. If the couple is unable to carry the embryo to term without surrogacy, this potential life will never become life. I've also been a part of embryo donation and one couple in particular has completed its family but has additional embryos and donates it to another family. I personally know of 2 wonderful boys who are cherished as a result of an embryo donation. Representative Hansen inaccurately represented my agency's treatment of selective reduction. I'd like to clarify this. Selective reduction is something that we discuss because it is important to look at this issue. It does not call for abortion, but if there is a risk to the surrogate's health or her life, the parties discuss and agree that her health and life are paramount. Earlier testimony also suggested surrogacy may well lead to abortion. Unfortunately, in our country, any pregnancy may well lead to abortion. That is a difficult situation, but a wholly different discussion. We are also cognizant that we respect a surrogate's position on abortion. For instance, a surrogate who will not terminate any pregnancy will be matched with a couple who wholeheartedly agree to this approach. She may not be compelled to do so. In addition, our agency does not pay any amount for reduction. The intended parents pay the surrogate for the pain of undergoing a surgical procedure. I'd also like to point out the difference between gestational and traditional surrogacy. It is a common misunderstanding that we are talking about a woman becoming pregnant with her own egg. That is not the case in gestational surrogacy. The embryo belongs to the intended parent, the couple who are trying to have the baby. The gestational surrogate or gestational carrier is not the biological mother. The parents often use their own genetics to create the embryo. This isn't the case that a woman is paid to give up her own child, as in traditional surrogacy. Representative Hansen in his testimony also compared adoption to surrogacy. However, as these are the children of the intended parent, not the surrogate, the birth mother is not giving up her child. She has instead carried another child for them. There has been some testimony of worst case scenarios. These instances are why it is so important that we act with utmost ethics. This isn't akin to an organ donation, as was stated earlier. The gestational carrier has to undergo painful injectable medications, miss work, go to appointments, disrupt her life. A typical journey is a year long, a year of their life. We are very clear from the start that the life and health of the gestational carrier is treated by all parties, including the hospital, with utmost priority. According to the Harvard Business Review, over 700 women a year die of complications related to pregnancy in the United States. The solution is not to prevent pregnancy. It is to do a better job of managing the prenatal and postnatal health of mothers. I would also like to address Ms. Martinez's experience in which she was asked to lie to the French consulate. I'm so saddened to hear of her difficult experience, which is fortunately not typical. I worked in my law practice with international, including French parents, and I am likewise bewildered, and that was absolutely unnecessary. Most states allow surrogacy. 39 other states permit it. And I can go through the list if you'd like, but I'll be more brief. Only 5 states have prohibited surrogacy. Nebraska prohibits commercial surrogacy, but allows that the biological father will be listed on the birth certificate. I take great joy in my role. My favorite part of my job comes at the end of the pregnancy when a baby boy or baby girl is born. I ask for a picture of the baby. Every time, tears spring to my eyes because I know how important this is for these new parents and how much they went through to get there. What surrogacy does is allow parents with no other option a path to parenthood. These folks go through so much. Please don't take away their last hope to become parents. Allow them to have the joy in their heart when their beautiful 2.5-year-old child babbles, giggles, and smiles with them. To help ensure people find this joy of parenthood, I ask that you request input from the Bar Association and put in place a summer study session to have input on the proper treatment of surrogacy in South Dakota. Thank you.
Ms. Galley, while you're on the line, I'm going to invite members of the committee to ask any questions they might have of you at this time. Members, yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to know if, we're talking about the selling of children. If a pregnancy results in loss, then does the surrogate still get paid?
Yes, she gets paid for the amount of time that she is pregnant, and for any loss that, so a lot of times she would have lost wages or she'd have additional child care as a result. She gets paid for the pain and suffering of losing a child as well. She gets a monthly, usually gets a monthly allowance, and so those would be prorated because those are meant to compensate her during the time that she's pregnant, and to compensate for what she's going through with the pain and suffering of pregnancy.
We have a follow-up?
Is there a difference in what she's paid between what you just stated and if the pregnancy resulted in a child?
Yes, to the extent that if the child is brought to, so if she were to miscarry, let's say at 20 weeks, then she wouldn't continue to be paid her monthly payment for the pain and suffering of pregnancy for the remainder of the 20 weeks, until 40 weeks. But, so yes, there's a difference in that sense. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Gordon.
Good morning. How much are women paid to be surrogates?
It varies widely. I've worked with surrogates who are paid, so first of all, I've worked with surrogates that are altruistic or do it for a family member or a friend and choose not to get any payment. Some of them they'll refuse lost wages pay. I've also worked with surrogates who are paid, and what I usually see is $15,000 would be something that could be considered reasonable to $25,000. In other parts of the country, surrogates are often paid more, and I believe that's because there's just a higher cost of living in other parts of the country, and there's more people.
You have a follow-up? All right, thank you. Representative Reimer.
Thank you. During your testimony, I don't know how many times we've heard the word burden, pain, and suffering. And that bothers me because as a mother, it was a painful yes, but I've never looked at pregnancy as a burden, pain, or suffering. And I would never want to be paid for that. But my question to you are the parents always people who cannot carry a child, or are they parents that do not want to go through what you call burden, pain, and suffering?
I have never worked with a parent who was doing this out of a choice. It's not a first choice thing to do. It's not, this is something that the parents are in this to get a child, and this is their options have been limited and narrowed to the point where this is their last option.
All right, any further questions from members of the committee for this witness? Representative Schwab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the testifier here, I was curious, could you tell me, we've got a list of kind of overlying what states regulate, which states ban, which states do nothing, and then countries too. And I guess what I'm really interested in knowing more about is, could you provide any information about which states or which countries criminalize commercial surrogacy, if there are any?
Yes. Just one moment, let me find my notes on that. I don't know all of, all the different countries. That's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you the states. Let's see. So, only 5 states have prohibited surrogacy. Nebraska prohibits commercial surrogacy, but provides that the biological father will be listed on the birth certificate. Virginia does allow it in some instances in their statute. Wyoming statute states it neither authorizes nor prohibits gestational surrogacy. Let me see. I don't know if I'll be able to pull up in time I think I can. Here we go. Okay. Louisiana, Michigan, and New York are the other 3 states that have either a statute or published case law that prohibits compensated surrogacy contracts, or they don't allow a birth certificate to be issued naming both parents on the certificate.
Follow up?
You may.
Maybe my question was poorly worded. I'm curious if there are any states out there that, outside of whether the contract's enforceable or void as a matter of public policy, if they, in addition to that, make it a crime for you, I guess, to serve in the current role that you do.
The closest would be Nebraska, but none of them, to my knowledge, in any way target a surrogacy agency like this does.
No follow-up.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Gailey. We have time to take one more caller. I believe we have a Amber Riskin.
This is the House Judiciary Committee entertaining testimony on House Bill 1096. So if you want me to put you on speaker, I'll put you on in just a minute.
Hello, is this Amber Rickerson, or Rickersrud?
This is Amber Rickensrud, yes.
Yes, please. Would you wish to give testimony on House Bill 1096? If so, please proceed.
I do. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking my testimony this morning. My name is Amber Rickensrud, and I am from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I am testifying today in opposition of House Bill 1096. My surrogacy journey began in 2014 while I was pregnant with my last biological child. During that pregnancy, I was introduced to 2 women who were carrying babies as gestational surrogates at the time. Talking to them about their surrogacy journeys planted the seed in my mind for what would become my own journey over the next 4 years. Several of my friends and family have struggled with infertility, and I wanted to do something to help others struggling to complete their families as well. My husband and I had completed our family with our 3rd child in October of 2014, and about 6 months later I began exploring surrogacy and what that would look like for my family. I met with other surrogates to get more information about how their journeys had gone and by what method or agency they had gone through. I also did research on my own for agency options. I felt very strongly about going through an agency because I knew it would best protect me as a surrogate, both physically and mentally, as well as the intended family. I chose an agency based on referral and was approved in August of 2015. The process to become a surrogate with this agency began in September 2015 when my husband and I were both brought to to the agency to complete a thorough psychological and physical screening. We met with doctors and counselors to discuss our intentions and reasons for wanting to become a surrogate, as well as discuss what the process would look like when and if all of our screenings and tests came back normal. This process was also completed for all the intended parents utilizing the agency. The counselors would ask me questions of how I would feel about certain scenarios that could happen during my surrogacy journey, questions that I would not have ever thought about before jumping into carrying someone else's child. This process was important to me because it made me feel safe and protected as a potential surrogate. The agency provided counselors and doctors throughout the entire process, and they also worked very hard to match surrogates with intended parents based on these screenings. Once I had officially been approved as a surrogate, the agency would work to match me with potential intended parents. My agency would always provide the surrogate with a parent profile to review first, and if I was comfortable with the potential match, my profile would be shared with the intended parent. I was never pressured to say yes to the first, second, or even third profile that I would receive. They wanted me to be most comfortable with the intended parents that I would potentially be carrying a baby for. Once both the surrogate and intended parents agreed on each other, the agency would arrange an in-person match meeting. They would attend the meeting with the parents and the surrogate to question us both, and then we were left to talk on our own for a little while following the agency. This match meeting was important to my husband and I, as we both feel a better read and connection with others when we have the opportunity to see and talk to them in person. In October of 2015, I was matched with a family from Dallas, Texas. This couple had met later in life and completed infertility treatments via IVF in 2013. The mother had become pregnant with twins but suffered several complications during pregnancy, which led to bed rest until the babies were born prematurely at 32 weeks in April of 2014. Shortly after giving birth to her twins, this mother had to undergo a partial hysterectomy, crushing her dreams of having a large family. From the time of our match, our intended parents adopted us into their family, essentially. We went on to transfer 2 embryos with the dad's sperm and mom's eggs in January of 2016. These 2 embryos were 2 of only 3 that they had available to try. Unfortunately, neither of the embryos took. While this was extremely sad for all of us, it is very common to have this happen, and not once did my intended parents ever make me feel like I had let them down or disappointed them in any way. We spent the next year and a half waiting while the mother and father completed several more egg retrievals, just trying to get at least one more good embryo to try with. This time actually gave the intended parents and I a great amount of bonding time, and we have become lifelong friends because of it. After a year and a half of failed attempts, the intended parents decided to try one more time with the last good embryo that they had frozen. In August of 2017, we transferred the last good embryo, to which I was given a positive pregnancy test 10 days later. Upon that positive pregnancy test, I was moved to my primary care physician, OBGYN, here in Sioux Falls. My intended mother made a trip to Sioux Falls for every single appointment that I had. The agency did their part to support me throughout the entire process with counseling and regular support checkups. On April 5th, 2018, with the mother in the C-section room with me, holding my hand, I gave birth to a very healthy 9-pound, 1-ounce baby boy. The moment was nothing short of magical. The proud new parents had their own room at the hospital to bond with their baby, and they were constantly checking in on me and thanking me fanatically for helping to make their family complete. Following delivery, however, I suffered some complications and began to hemorrhage, putting me back into surgery. My intended parents, along with the agency, who had previously offered to meet in person for labor and delivery, were in constant contact with my husband to ensure my safety and to make sure I was taken care of physically and emotionally, as well as financially. Infertility is a very difficult and emotional struggle for so many families. Being a surrogate has fulfilled my dream and desire to help another family grow, and it has become so much more than I could have ever imagined. I would not have been able to do this without the support of the agency to ensure my mental and physical health, as well as my family's safety. Additionally, I have referred others to surrogacy through an agency of which 2 have completed their journeys to help grow families. I hope that my testimony today demonstrates the impact that surrogacy has had on my family, as well as the family we help to grow, and the importance of utilizing agency to protect and support us all. In closing, I'm asking that you please oppose House Bill 1096. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Any questions from any members of the committee as to Ms. Ricketts-Ruth? Hearing none, we've utilized the time that was allotted for the opponent's testimony, so we're going to move that to any questions that any members have as to the persons that have already testified. Unless you wanted to offer some rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might just defer to Ms. Law for a brief rebuttal.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. Well, we've heard a lot of those who oppose this bill. There's this fallacy, I think, that we can regulate this practice so that all these harms and things that happen to Kelly and the women that I described in my testimony wouldn't happen. Well, we can't wish away women who died by passing a law. When we talk about regulation, and regulation is the way to go. I live in California. California prides itself as being the most heavily regulated IVF surrogacy state in the nation. Where have the women died? Two of the three women who I quoted today died in California. Melissa Cook, whose case went to the Supreme Court, was in California. Brittany Rose Torres was in California. So where the industry creeps in is when you see trouble. You don't see trouble in states where surrogacy is prohibited. The attorney that testified didn't know that Michigan, this is a criminal offense in Michigan. You cannot do commercial surrogacy. You can do altruistic surrogacy in Michigan, but it's a criminal activity if you do commercial surrogacy in the state of Michigan. She quoted Louisiana as being against surrogacy. That's not true. Commercial surrogacy is legal in Louisiana if you're a married heterosexual couple. That's the law of Michigan, and it is a patchwork. We've heard a lot of sad stories. We're all sympathetic to people who can't have children and want children. Those people who can't have children and want children can still be helped by surrogacy under this law. They just can't be paid. So what sort of stands out in my mind is it's about the money. Are we buying and selling children? Well, New York State had a task force, which is the basis of the current law, which prohibits commercial surrogacy out as now. And that task force, which took 3 years to meet, said it cannot be distinguished from the buying and selling of a child. What are women threatened with during their surrogate contract pregnancy? Breach of contract. The money will stop. You will not be paid anymore because you're not following orders. That money is being attached to the baby. Her job is to hand over a baby in exchange for money. I travel with Jessica Kern, who was born of a commercial surrogate contract. Her first baby picture is in a lawyer's office where her surrogate mother is handing her over to intended parents and a $10,000 check is being exchanged. She calls herself a product. She says, I was bought and sold. You heard a lot about the risks of women who go through IVF and infertility and treatment and miscarriage and loss. The surrogate mother goes through much of that as well. She takes these fertility drugs because she has to prime her uterus in order to accept a foreign embryo, in order to get her body ready to receive this embryo transfer. She stays on these hormones for several weeks, if not months, to ensure that that pregnancy implants and that baby starts growing and developing. So these mothers who aren't patients are taking drugs that they otherwise wouldn't be taking. They're not sick. They're not taking a drug because there's something that needs to be treated in them. They're taking these drugs too, and they're going through this. So this pregnancy is not work. The mother is not being compensated for her pain and her suffering in her job. She's being paid to give a baby over. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee as to those who have given testimony here personally today? Representative Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for Jennifer.
Can I come back up? I'm sorry. the airport.
Oh, okay, let's be prompt in our response then, shall we? Simple question. What happens if the recipient parents decide that they want to terminate the contract and it's still a healthy, viable pregnancy? What are the options to the mother?
So when you say terminate the contract, is that because they want her to terminate the pregnancy?
Well, I'm asking you that. What would be the basis for a contract termination? Because we've heard, through the testimony, we've heard dissatisfaction because they wanted one of each gender, or whatever it may be. Well, actually, you honed me in on the question. Or have you seen contracts for commercial surrogacy that put the ability to either leverage or force a mother to terminate the pregnancy?
I have many contracts that I've read. Most of them have been drafted in California. They overwhelmingly include clauses that are called abortion termination clauses or fetal reduction clauses. So it's a pretty standard inclusion in surrogate contracts that I've seen. Of course, between intended parents and surrogates and the attorney, they can add and subtract all kinds of other things into the contract. I mentioned the one woman about actual end-of-life decision-making in her contract. So it's not like one contract. There's no standard contract.
So that puts the mother in a difficult situation of choice.
Yeah.
Or perhaps
It absolutely does. And the two women that I quoted, Melissa Cook and Brittany Rose Torres, they signed contracts that had that language in it, which is why they were then threatened for breach of contract when they wouldn't reduce the triplet pregnancies down, which is why we had to scramble and find them pro bono attorneys, because they were being threatened with, you have to give the money back, you're in breach of contract, we're gonna sue you because you're not fulfilling the contract that you signed. So they, surrogate mothers often think that they can, because they don't think they're gonna be faced with this. Again, it gets back to rolling the dice. When you need the money, you'll sign a contract because you're thinking, well, I'm not gonna be asked to reduce or terminate a healthy pregnancy. And then when they sign that contract, they're bound to that contract.
Or is it pushes a moral decision for a commercial purpose in a contract that's commercial based? Thank you for that. And that's, no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Reimer. Representative Reimer.
Thank you. Questions for you, Jennifer. You had stated earlier that maternal mortality rate is on the rise. What role does commercial surrogacy play a part in this? Do you have any numbers?
Oh, we don't, because that's one of the dirty little secrets is when babies are born. Maybe you're even sitting here listening today, not realizing, wow, we've got this many babies in South Dakota, and this attorney's had 100. We don't track this. So how much of the rise of maternal death is associated with surrogacy? There would be no way for me to get that figure for me. But my point is, why would we want to add to that by codifying a commercial industry to put women at risk?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
No, and that's just what I wanted to know. I know, just maybe bring awareness to it as well, but that's all I need. Thank you.
Representative Dietrich has another question.
One more question. We heard about a lot of international talk in this. Is there, do you know the ratio of what's international or local, or how do we get these relationships?
As far as how much international people are coming here,
right? Yeah,
it's a lot. That's why my documentary with County's Big Fertility. I mean, it's growing. This is a multi-billion-dollar a year global industry that's on the rise. And because overwhelmingly most of Europe does not permit surrogacy at all, and even more so commercial, and the global South is just closing it down because they've had so many women and children that have been harmed in India, Thailand, Singapore. All these, I mean, if you have to say why is it that it's closing or not a burgeoning market, and that's only encouraging more and more people to come to the U.S. I mean, in California, in Southern California, agencies will advertise, come because, go to Disneyland, get a baby on vacation, and we'll sort out all the immigration, the visas, and we'll take care of you. So it's quite lucrative.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Lateral.
Thank you for being proponent. would it possibly provide a method for someone from another country to accelerate their permanent residency status using this method? If they wanted to become a citizen, they wanted to have a child that's a citizen. You mentioned that, but I didn't know if that was something that would provide an avenue for permanent residency.
I'm honestly not an expert in immigration and that. I just know that if you just Google surrogacy and anchor baby, there's quite a bit of noise and reporting on the fact, and in particular the Chinese who come, because then the baby at least has U.S. citizen. Now how much that child escalates or fast tracks parents and siblings and everybody else to get access to an immigration path, that I don't know.
Representative Schwab.
This may be a question for you or the drafter of the bill. Looking at the bill and hearing the testimony today, I guess I'm curious why the couple and the woman carrying the child shouldn't also be criminals under this proposed bill.
Well, you can ask the authors. I'm just not at all interested or at peace throwing women in jail.
I guess I would like to ask that representative.
Just not a fan.
Thank you. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for the question, Mr. Chair. Oh, I couldn't agree more with what was just said by Ms. Law. And there's always a level of discomfort when it comes to putting mothers in prison or jail, and so that's one reason. And the other reason too is, we tried to draft this bill as narrowly as possible to really get to the heart of the matter, which is these for-profit businesses that are buying and selling children, making a commodity out of children. That's what we're trying to get at here. That's why we only talk about criminalizing the brokers in the bill.
Follow up?
Please.
Well, I guess I'm a real estate attorney, and there are brokers in the real estate industry, and a lot of times I'll have clients come up to me who they went ahead and sold their own home. They kind of met with the potential buyers, and they reached a handshake, and they come to me to help memorialize that handshake. I mean, I think a woman could do that too, independently of an agency, even with this bill. I mean, is the intent of this bill and is the effect of this bill to, I guess, criminalize that woman's decision and contract?
Sure. I don't think that you'll see in the language of the bill that criminalization would be included under this language. The other point to make too is that we're trying very carefully, again, I'll reiterate, to just talk about the prohibition on these brokerages and not impact altruistic services. And so that's the other reason why, to your question, Representative, we leave the mothers alone, we leave the intended parents alone, in part so that, when we're talking about this language, be careful just to be talking about the for-profit businesses, not the mother and intended parents in an altruistic setting.
A follow-up?
You may.
But if the mom, if the woman goes ahead and reaches this deal with this couple, isn't she in effect brokering a deal to carry someone else's, children to term?
So the language of the bill says any broker who knowingly engages in advertises services for, offers payment of money or other consideration for, profits from, solicits a woman for, or otherwise assists or participates in a commercial surrogacy is guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. And a broker is defined in part as a person that knowingly seeks to introduce or to match a mother with a commercial surrogacy recipient. So if a mother is acting as a broker, acting as essentially a for-profit brokerage in her own personal capacity, then it's likely that she would fall under the provisions of this section. And that's why you see in part back in section 2, we have exceptions that apply to the payment of healthcare expenses. And so in the altruistic setting, which we're doing our best here to leave untouched, if there is a reimbursement of medical expenses for an altruistic surrogacy mother, that they would be allowed to do that in that situation.
I guess one more follow-up if I may.
Sure.
I guess my question is why? Why are we treating the mother defined herein, and then also the I guess the couples or the individuals who are creating the demand for this business? Why are we treating them differently from people who are acting as kind of third-party facilitators, brokers, when they seem to be involved and in fact exchanging consideration too?
Mr. Chairman, if you're proposing that we prohibit all surrogacy, including altruistic surrogacy, that's another conversation for another day, I'm afraid. But it might be a conversation worth having. But here we're not talking about that. We're just talking about the commercialization, for-profit businesses.
I guess maybe I can clarify my question if I may, Mr. Chair. I mean, the parents of this child are providing consideration. The woman who is carrying the child is receiving consideration in this thing, and we're declaring this contract that embodies the consideration potentially be void. Why aren't we also considering them to be criminals under section 2?
Mr. Chairman, if the member would like to bring an amendment proposed to this committee criminalizing mothers and intended parents, he could do that.
Thank you. Why don't we move on to discussion? Is there any discussion? Time are we having? Does anyone have a motion? Representative Schwab.
Well, I guess through my line of questioning, you can figure out kind of where I feel. I like a lot of this bill. Section 1 and Section 3 do not bother me. I don't think we should have these contracts, but when I look at the criminal component, Section 2, I guess I'm a little concerned about that. I mean, for a crime to exist, you have to have a criminal act and you have to have criminal intent. And I guess the testimony I heard today from the woman who runs the Dakota Surrogacy, which my understanding is the only surrogacy group in South Dakota, and from the surrogates themselves, I didn't hear a lot of criminal intent. It seemed to be coming from a different point in the reason they were doing this, and that their compensation component of it was just something that they felt that they needed. But I never necessarily, I didn't get the sense that they were acting on this in a manner that was criminal. And so I don't think these contracts should be enforceable in the state of South Dakota. I do think they raise a lot of concerns. But I also don't know that we need to go to the extent to where we're making it a crime. The fact that the contract would be void under this bill in and of itself would accomplish the goal of nullifying these contracts from being enforceable. And of course, if you don't have an enforceable contract, you don't really have a reason to enter into it. And so I'm struggling with wanting to, I guess, see this practice, these contracts not occur, but at the same time, a public policy balancing act. I don't think that the women who testified today, and I haven't seen any evidence otherwise to suggest that they had criminal intent. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
1096B.
Oh, I have to go to the website.
I have a comment.
Has everybody reviewed the proposed amendments to 1096? Which should be on the website. The proposed amendments to section 2 would be a last sentence which would read, the provisions in this section do not apply to any broker activity stemming from a commercial surrogacy entered into before July 1st of 2020. Section 3 then would read as amended, a commercial surrogacy, whether entered into this state or any other state after July 1st, 2020 is unenforceable and void in this state. Have all of you had an opportunity to review that? Okay. We have a motion then to
Comment.
You made a comment, go ahead.
Thank you. Comment question, why was the date of, the enactment date considered rather than an earlier date? Because, let's say this bill is signed by the governor, there will be a period of time where commercial surrogacy can still be entered into between now and July. So I'm curious on the date, how you chose the date there.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question, Representative. I take your point, but I just thought it'd be the cleanest way, that the easiest date to say that when the law becomes effective, that's when you can no longer have entered into these agreements.
Any other questions concerning the proposed amendments? Any discussion about the proposed amendments? Otherwise, any thoughts? If not, then we have a motion and a second to amend 1096 with 1096 2B, is it? 1096B. We will do a voice vote as to each section. We can go to the entire bill. Pardon?
Oh, it's actually, it's one amendment.
Yeah. All right, we'll just do it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the amendment is passed. Any discussion then on 1096B?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move amendment 1096C.
Second.
Has anyone then received 1096C? Have you all reviewed that?
Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion then?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you read that section 4A, the language provides that a contract written or oral, you jump down to, I'm sorry, B, 4B. A contract with a written or oral that is entered into by two or more persons, including the mother or a commercial surrogacy recipient, who agree prior to insemination or in the case of an implanted embryo or embryos, prior to the embryo transfer or implantation, to cause the gestation of a child, and then it goes on. The reason we're changing participate in the creation to cause the gestation of the child is because when you have an embryo, you have a member of the human species, you have a human being already created. So that's why we're just clarifying that to make sense with the language that's already in that provision.
Any further discussion concerning 1096 B, or C, rather? Any questions about it? All right. We had a motion and we have a second.
Second.
Had a second by Isaac Lateral. All those in favor then of 1096C, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying no. 1096C stands as amended. Then we'll go back to the original bill as amended by 1096 and B and C. Any discussion on the bill as amended?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. up in the terms of the broker, it says, the first thing it says a person, right? So I'm assuming, if I'm reading the law correctly, I'm not a lawyer, but the law, then in section 2, you could translate any person who knowingly engages in, and continue on from there. I'm wondering if that part needs to be repealed or amended out, if that would impede on altruistic surrogacy, I think that's the correct terminology. Is that something, or am I misunderstanding that correctly? If you could give some thoughts on that. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the question. So we've got a few definitions just to walk through, and you're right. A broker is a person, and then you can just skip through the entity language. So a person that knowingly seeks to introduce or to match a mother with a commercial surrogacy recipient. And so you can have a person acting in their individual capacity as a broker. They don't have some sort of business formed, but they're acting in their own individual capacity. And so if a person is knowingly seeking to introduce or to match a mother with a commercial surrogacy recipient, and then there's for the purpose of initiating, assisting, or facilitating a commercial surrogacy. Then you switch to section 2, so that's the definition of broker, so you can apply that down below. A broker is somebody who knowingly engages in, advertises services for, offers payment of money or other consideration for, profits from, solicits a woman for, or otherwise assists or participates in a commercial surrogacy, is guilty of a class 1 misdemeanor. So the language is intended to capture an individual who's acting as a brokerage, not under some business entity, but just in their own personal capacity. But just to make sure that we don't impact the altruistic situation. If there is a person doing all of those things, so not just like your relative or something who you go to, that would apply under this language. But if there's a person who is knowingly seeking to introduce or match a mother with a commercial surrogacy recipient, and if that person happens to be the mother in the surrogacy agreement, then we still have the language in this bill that allows for the payment of healthcare expenses in section 2. So if all of those things were to apply, which is it'd be a very rare situation, but if all of those things were to apply, even in that situation, you could still reimburse for medical expenses.
Thank you for walking through that.
Any further discussion on the bill as amended? The chair then will entertain a motion. You may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move to pass on 1096 as amended.
Second.
We have a motion to pass on 1096 as amended and a second. We will, any further discussion then before I ask for a,
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to reiterate all that's been said today, because I know that there has been a lot of testimony and we're almost up to the 2-hour mark. I just want to say that I'm grateful for the people who have testified today, and I'll just say again that there are some things that money can't buy, and my heart goes out to anybody struggling with infertility. As I said before, I don't have the answers for everybody. I do pray that adoption is the answer for some of these individuals, but I do know that making a for-profit business and commodity out of mothers and children is wrong. And so I would ask for your support of this bill. Thank you.
Any further comments? Members of the committee? Yes, Representative Bork.
Thank you. I don't disagree that there's extreme potential for exploitation of women with commercial surrogacy. I am concerned about the possibility of pushing something like this underground where we do, rather than utilizing groups like Dakota Surrogacy, who maintains a strict code of conduct and ethics. If we end up pushing it underground and it goes to Craigslist and back rooms. So again, I'm very sympathetic and I'm on board with not wanting women to be exploited for committees, just expressing concerns about desperate parents and desperate women. So I don't know if maybe we would be better served to use a code of ethics and regulate it rather than ban it. So.
Thank you. Representative Schwab.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief. I'm gonna echo my concerns about section 2. Even as I look at it more, where it talks about advertising services for this type of contract, that being a class 1 misdemeanor. I think we run into a situation where we have a struggling couple who may be desperate, may be going on Craigslist to advertise for this because they desperately yearn to have a child, and they've run out of options after trying everything else. And under this section, we're making that a crime. And I don't think they're acting as criminals by expressing that frustration and seeking out those alternatives. And I would add too, a young woman who shouldn't be, but maybe is going out and advertising to offer herself up for this service, even though if she's not a mother yet, which is where the exception comes in, would also be someone who would become a criminal under this statute. And while that's certainly a little bit different, I know the women we heard testify today, they did have altruistic purposes in seeking to be a surrogate. And if they're out there advertising, then I think they're technically a broker because they're not a mother yet under the language. And I just have deep concerns in section 2 that we're going to be making a crime here out of something that's not, it doesn't have the intent. So we'll have the vote. If it were to fail, I think I would propose an amendment to strike that section out, support the rest of the bill. But with that in there, I can. Thanks.
With that, then I'm going to call for a roll call vote on House Bill 1096 as amended by 1096B and 1096C, which is an act to prohibit commercial surrogacy contracts and provide for penalty facilitating a commercial surrogacy. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Barthel?
Aye.
Borglum? Aye. Schwab?
No.
Dietrich?
Aye.
Hammack?
Aye.
Lateral?
Aye.
Pitchy?
Aye.
Poirier? Excused? Rasmussen?
Aye.
Reimer?
Aye.
St. John? Aye. Johns?
Aye.
Hanson?
Aye.
We have 11 yeas and 1 nay.
House Bill 1096 is amended by